Hello, we're live. Hi, my name is Jamie Nisbet, and I am the Assistant Director of Graduate Recruitment for Studio Arts College International, SACI, in Florence, Italy. And this is the webinar for the graduate programs, the MFA in Studio Art, and both the 2-year and the summer low residency program. Tonight, I'm joined by Radha. I'm sorry, Radha, can you say your name? Because I think it's Radha
Tag.
Yeah. So I'm by alumna from 2015. And so the two of us, we're going to have a conversation tonight and talk about the program, what it's like for students, and answer your questions. If you're joining live, you can ask questions. If you're on a personal computer, if you're in a browser, you can see the screen to ask questions to the right of the video feed. And if you're using a mobile device, I'd recommend getting the app quick and using the YouTube app, because if you can swipe up and view the chat and enter your questions there. Sometimes there's a little delay with the questions, so if you start putting them in now, it will be easier for us to answer them towards the end. But right now I'm going to share my screen and do just a little overview of the program, so that just to kind of give you a sense of, let's see here, where is it? Just to give you a sense of what, I'm trying to find the correct screen here, but just to give you a sense of what the academic structure of the program is, and how it works for students when they're coming over through the application process, and just some of the benefits of the program. So I'm just going to share that right now. All right. And Radha, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, I see it.
All right. So we'll get started. Just to kind of give you a sense of, oh, I have a bit of a delay. There we go. Of the programs we're offering. Tonight, I'm going to be focusing in on the MFA in Studio Art and the low residency MFA in Studio Art. We'll have some other webinars for a few of our other programs coming up next week and the week after, such as the MFA in Communication Design and our post-baccalaureate programs in Studio Art and Conservation. And then we'll have some more later in the season about process. We'll have an alumni panel. So if you're interested in that, you can find more details on the SACI website. I'll also be giving my contact information at the end. To get into the main part of what I want to share tonight, and just to kind of focus in on what I would say are the biggest focuses of the program and what we're offering for graduate students. For SACI, on-site experience, access, and collaboration is a really big component of that. And taking advantage of our location is kind of a central part of all of our academic programs. We're located in the heart of Florence. So if you look at this image here, you can see on kind of the main part of the skyline, the cathedral, and our buildings are really right there in the heart of Florence, and our students live right there in the historic center, and you're really surrounded by a lot of what's and beauty of the city that's really the birthplace of the Renaissance. We're not an isolated campus, so students are really walking on these historic streets and getting to kind of be around the culture, the people, the really beautiful sites, the churches, the museums, and as an institution, we're really focused on students being able to access both the historical and the contemporary arts in Florence. MFA and Studio Art students, this is an image where they were working that was at Palazzo Strozzi. They were working with Ai Weiwei and some of the artists he brought together on a project called Political Objects. And we have partnerships with other national museums, including the Academia, where Michelangelo's David is, and some different design initiatives and projects that our students across different programs are connected to, whether it's in conservation or design. We try to bring in interesting conversations and lectures. Last year we hosted a symposium that was in partnership with NASA about the connection between the arts and sciences. This fall, we have just, I think, on October 9th, so just coming up, we have a symposium about feminist art, where we've some interesting speakers, as well as some SACI alumna and faculty. And we have 2 gallery spaces where we host different exhibitions. We have lectures that happen around some of the visiting artists, as well as student shows. We have our students work in places outside of our SACI galleries as well, so different exhibition opportunities. And I think the one thing I'd want to impress, and I'm sure Radha will kind of to speak to this later on, is that while Florence has this incredible history that students can really take advantage of, there's also a lot of access to the contemporary arts, not just in Florence, but in places around Italy. But Florence itself, being such an iconic city, does draw in, especially through different initiatives with Palazzo Strozzi, which I mentioned, interesting contemporary arts, and our students' access and contribution to it through their work and exhibitions as well. But I think, to me, I think one of the biggest maybe differences between getting a degree at SACI versus another US accredited institution would be that you are in Europe and you're using Europe as a launch, or you're using Florence really as a launch pad to the rest of Europe, and getting access to seeing a lot of the history, a lot of historical works and interesting museums in person, but then also contemporary art. I'll go back here. This is a Centro Pecci, which is in Prato, which is a really interesting contemporary art institution. This is an image from the Venice Biennale, so really kind of great places to have access to when it comes to foot into the contemporary art in Europe. And this is just to kind of give you a taste. I'm abbreviating the presentation a little bit because I want to get to talking to Radha soon, but to kind of very quickly go through some of the aspects of the MFA in studio art, we have 2 different options that are pretty distinctive. The 2-year program is a kind of typical full-time academic year program. The focus of that program is painting and drawing. And we have the summer low-residency program, where students complete the program over 3 12-week terms that take place over 3 summers. The difference between the 2 programs, aside from the timing, is that the 2-year program students are focused in painting and drawing, while the summer low residency program students can focus across a lot of different areas in the visual arts, including things like photography, sculpture, ceramics, also painting and drawing. So it has a little bit of a different approach. I would say both good tracks, but depending on your scheduling and the pace that you can complete the program, there's going to be some differences in the curriculum. In general, students in the MFA in studio art program for the 2-year, like I said, are focused in painting and drawing, but they can explore and often create work outside of painting and drawing as well. Students can do directed independent studies with different SACI faculty members that may kind of instruct them and guide them through specific studio areas, whether it be things in the media arts, multidisciplinary studio arts. It could be work into your pieces. So there still is that opportunity in the 2-year program to explore. But I would say one of the big components of that program is that you're using drawing as almost like a journal within your graduate seminars, and then a little bit of a cold. I'm so sorry. And then having painting still being a big component of the program. I'm sorry, I'm gonna pause for a second because I'm losing my voice here. Excuse me. Radha, I'm gonna turn it over to you really quickly because I'm gonna get some water. But Radha, do you want to start by introducing yourself and maybe talking about your work in the program? So,
Sure.
Thank you.
Hello, this is my first live broadcast. That's a little weird. But my name is Rada, and I was part of the first MFA in studio art class. And I did my undergrad at Laguna College of Art and Design in California, which is a very sort of traditional representational school. It's very small and very sort of individualized education. And that was something that I felt was very beneficial for me and something that I was looking for in a graduate school as well. So going to SACI really kind of fit with what I was looking for in that sense. And it definitely fulfilled my expectations in that sense. So you get to really know your professors and they get to know you and they really care about your work. So it was a good experience for me.
And you want to speak a little bit about the structure of the program, the kinds of things that you do in the graduate seminars and field trips that you went on and things that you kind of experienced in the program that might be of interest to students, especially when they're looking to complete their MFA in Europe.
Yeah, well, so we had like sort of the studio component of the graduate seminar and then the more sort of like art historical component. And as far as the like studio component, I really liked the program. It was different than a lot of programs that I was looking at because a lot of the ones that I was looking at sort of wanted you to have like an idea already that you were working on, and then they wanted you to sort of like hone it there at the school, whereas SACI was kind of like open for everything. And I didn't really know what I was doing, sort of what direction I really wanted to take my work in. And so having that kind of freedom to experiment with a lot of things was really what I was looking for. And I think really was sort of beneficial to my growth as an artist while I was there. And I tried a lot of things, and there's a lot of work that I just don't like that I did there. I made my favorite painting I've ever made for our graduate show. So it was pretty good experience to sort of kind of figure out who you are as an artist. And the other side, the sort of contemporary art side, like I think the first 2 weeks we were there, we went to the Venice Biennale, and it was like more contemporary art than I'd ever seen in my lifetime, like all at once. We spent like 2 days all day long just walking around looking at art. So it was a really like overwhelming experience in a really good way, and quite inspirational. And I don't know, SACI is like, it's an interesting experience to be making contemporary art in like this heart of the Renaissance that's just like filled with so much history. And I think it can't help but inform you in certain ways. I don't know, I think it's a pretty unique experience.
Yeah, I like what you said about kind of work that you didn't like that you made. I think that's a natural part of the process, but I think, and maybe you can kind of confirm this, but I think a lot of the MFA studio art alumni that I've spoken with have said, there was a big kind of like shakeup in the first year with your work too, where you are doing a lot of experimentation, but also that you may have come in thinking you were going to do or be a specific kind of artist, and then you really kind of changed direction. And I don't know if that was your experience at all, but I feel like that was a lot of what the alumni have kind of communicated to me. So
yeah, well, I took my first semester there, I took black and white photography with Romeo. And I never took in any kind of photography class. It was very new for me, but it really sort of, I don't know, changed my way of thinking about my painting as well. And like that was probably my favorite class that I took while I was there, just because it had so much of an influence on everything I was doing. And then, you know, like in my studio practice, I tried a lot of things that, like, I don't know, I felt like I was sort of kind of trying to force a lot of things, or I had different ideas about like what my work should be or what it means to be an artist and how your practice should be, that like I kind of had to eventually sort of accept the work that I needed to make and the sort of the way that I work as an artist. And so there was a lot of kind of discovering and developing my practice as an artist, which I think is, you know, what you go to a studio art program to do. So it was very effective, and I definitely felt like I moved forward a lot with my work, and I sort of understood my work a lot better at the end of the program than I did going into it.
That's great, yeah. I mean, you talked a little bit about the Venice Biennale, and I know I cut the presentation short, but I did kind of go a little bit into the travel component, because I know that you guys went to Berlin and maybe London, or
yeah,
and some other places, and I think that that's also a really unique component of the program, and maybe it's something that's different when it comes to what I would say is like kind of some of the academic focus. The students joining in on the webinar, you know, should be aware of too, is that, you know, we're not thinking of kind of the experience as you being kind of locked away in your studio the whole time. Is that we want you to be kind of seeing, experiencing, looking as much as possible, and that's not just in Italy, although there's a lot in Italy, especially, you know, you mentioned the Biennale, that definitely takes place during both our MFA programs, and getting to see a lot of that really important contemporary art, and a lot, like a giant amount, as you mentioned, but also kind of using Italy and Florence as a launch pad for the rest of Europe. So, and getting to see some great work. I know that, for example, this fall, the first week, the MFA and studio art students were in Berlin just because of the timing of this certain sculpture exhibition. So I think the faculty are being really attentive to kind of curating field trips and getting to see work in person. And I think that's a special part about it too. I'm trying to think of what else to ask. I think maybe we'll check if there's any questions from anyone watching. I would say now would be the time to start asking questions too, and we'll kind of keep going. I know we still are early, and I might flip back to the presentation too, and just kind of see what I didn't cover. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask, are we here? Rada, you
yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Good. One of the questions I did want to ask too, and I always like to ask, is kind of advice for students when they're thinking about studying at SACI. You know, if you know, sometimes a good way to kind of look at it is, if you could go tell yourself when you were first applying and starting, if you could give one piece of advice to yourself, what would it be? You know, that is there something that, you know, that you would say to, you know, in 2013, I guess that's
I don't know. I think something that's very helpful, both in terms of like living in Italy and in terms of the program, is just to sort of like be open-minded, because it is quite different living in Italy. They, you know, do things in a different way than we do here, and but that's what like makes it so great. It's it definitely feels like a little adventurous living there. But you definitely have to be open-minded. You never know when like you have plans to go somewhere and then the trains, they just have a strike and you can't go and do what you're going to do. You have to just kind of go with the flow. And I think also for the program, like I did, you know, I tried a lot of things that I hadn't done before. I took like serigraphy, I took photography, and I just kind of tried to keep an open mind and like try a lot of things, because I think often it's hard to sort of define what it is you want, or what it is you need. It's a little bit easier to define yourself by what you don't want or what you don't like or what doesn't fit with your practice. So I think trying a lot of things helps you to define yourself, whether you enjoy that thing or you decide that's just not for you. It helps to kind of coalesce your idea about yourself as a person and as an artist.
That's helpful. We do have a few questions, so I just want to read them. The first question we have is just can you talk a little bit more about what the graduate seminar classes are like? And I know we did talk a little bit about it, but I would say maybe giving a sense of kind of the day-to-day. I know that one component of the graduate seminars is the contemporary art and one is the studio. So perhaps you can speak a little bit about that. I'd also want to mention too that a really great resource is that you can see a sample course syllabus for each semester of those courses too. But I would say, you know, we can maybe go into some of that like day to day with you too, or yeah.
Well, like for the studio component, you're given a studio space at least when I was there, it was in the Sant'Egidio building, and we had like the whole top floor of the building for the MFA studios. So, you know, you have your little studio space right next to your classmates, and it's a little sort of community environment, and, you know, you're kind of going around and peeking in on other people's studios and have little like impromptu kind of conversations about each other's work. So it's kind of nice to have that sort of space all together where you're working together. And like during the seminar, it kind of was just like you work in your studio, and then Karen, who at the time was the director, would come around and like just basically talk to you about your work, how things are going, like what kind of struggles you're having, what kind of goals you have and how to get there, and just kind of like, you know, delving into your actual practice of painting. And it kind of started out mostly painting, and then a lot of us sort of went in different directions. And then I kind of came back to painting because I don't think I'll ever get that far away from it. It's just, you know, my medium. But so that was nice that it was like very open of the sort of materials and directions that you could go in, and it just kind of was more like a conversation with a mentor about your work on, like, I think it was twice a week that we had the course, the seminar. And so it was kind of, it felt more like, it wasn't so much of a like student-teacher relationship as more like kind of having a conversation with a mentor. And really kind of all of the program felt that way in a lot of ways. You have directed independent study where you choose a professor and you kind of like basically develop a course for yourself. And so that was also very much had that sort of like one-on-one mentor kind of relationship. And then the like contemporary art aspect of the seminar, we did a lot of readings, and then we had like group discussions. There were a lot of like practicing artists who would come and give talks. We have curators who come and give talks, and just kind of to expose us to a lot of different like aspects about contemporary art, and especially like contemporary art in Europe, which was like a completely different scene than I had really been exposed to or educated about in my undergrad. So that was a really interesting experience. And we did field trips. We went to Berlin, we went to London, and like during the field trips, we did studio visits with artists, museum visits, all that kind of stuff. When we went to London, we went to the Frieze Art Fair, and that was, again, overwhelming amount of art. And we did our, at the end of the first year, we had a show at a museum in Cortona, which was kind of like a combination of both the studio and the sort of contemporary art parts. And that was pretty exciting. But yeah, the contemporary art is kind of maybe more like the academic side of it, of like doing readings and having discussions about it and writing papers about it and that kind of stuff.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful. I think that's a good description. Let's see here. And we'll go to some of the questions I might answer too. So one of the questions is there a place to look for tuition prices between the 2-year and the summer low residency? Yeah, you can go on the SACI website. If you go to our homepage, it's saci-florence.edu. You can, am I still live? Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. You froze a little bit, but I still hear
you. You can go into the different academic programs, and there's a lot of really easy drop-down menus to look through and look at the tuition and fees and get a sense. Also, there are PDF forms that go through projected cost of attendance that includes like budgets and stuff like that for like living expenses, that kind of thing. To kind of partner off of some of the costs, I'm going to skip to one other question, then I'll go back. That there was a question that says, can we talk a little bit about the cost of the school and how students pay for it? I'll speak a little bit, and maybe I'll let Radha jump in too. Are we still live? I think we are.
My thing says live. I think we are.
So, hopefully we are. Students can first apply for SACI scholarship, and the scholarship deadline for applicants is March 15th, and that's for all of the graduate programs, including the summer and the fall programs that start. And those awards range. They range anywhere from 10% to 50% of tuition. They don't cover the full cost of the program, so students do have to fund the rest of the program independently. So we are a U.S. institution, so students do have the option, if they're American citizens, to access U.S. federal direct loans. So those kinds of student loans are an option. And some students will have other ways that they're funding the program independently. I don't know if you have any advice, Radha, about that. I mean, it's a very individual process, I think, for most students. So.
Yeah. I mean, well, for me, like for the SACI scholarship, that was like super straightforward, easy to apply for, and I got a decent chunk that made it a lot easier to pay for the tuition. But it was, for me, it was a pretty easy experience.
Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest differences that I always like to point out to students between, because we're a U.S. accredited institution, I always kind of compare it to if you were going to receive a U.S. degree at a U.S. institution, like in the U.S. Probably the biggest difference is that it's more difficult and typically not possible for students to work while they are in the program. Some students will find some opportunities to work part-time and that kind of thing, but unless you have some kind of offer or can speak Italian fluently from the beginning, I think it's important not to budget for the program as if you're working. So that's one kind of piece of advice. I know some students that you were in the program during your time did do some work, and it was sometimes a challenge for them maybe. But yeah, some students will be able to find different things, but it's not a guarantee because you are a foreign person in Florence, and so typically it's going to be tough to get some employment while you're there. So I'm going to go, I'm hoping that answered well, but I'm going to put up my contact information for a few minutes before we close too. So if someone has any more like deeper questions, because I do think some of the kind of cost and how to pay for it questions are easier answered individually too. So the next question we have is, are the studio spaces and living spaces all in one facility? I can talk a little bit about that too. So we have 2 buildings in the center of Florence, and the graduate studios are in one building that is the one that Rada mentioned. And it's 4 stories, and it's mostly housing our graduate studios, both for studio art, photography, and for communication design. And then we also have all of our computer labs in that building, as well as a media library, the graduate dark rooms, a fresco studio space. And I know, Rada, you guys are on the top floor. That's kind of the main hub, but there's also studio spaces for the MFA and studio art students on different floors. I would say the studio spaces are, it's not the buildings are Renaissance palazzos, so it's not like you have your own room with a closed door. So it does have, like, I think sometimes in a positive way, like a collaborative feel. I know you mentioned that, kind of like engaging, like impromptu conversations about the work you're making too.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about kind of some of the facilities a little bit.
Yeah. Well, like basically when I was there, we had the sort of the top floor, and it's kind of like 3 rooms, but like 3 large rooms all sort of adjoining. And then we just kind of divided it up with little partitions into our different studio spaces. But yeah, I mean, it was like, it was usually, 4 or 5 of us there at a time, at least, working on something. And, some days it's just everybody's kind of like super focused and quiet and maybe listening to their music or whatever. And then other days it's kind of like everyone's hanging out and having conversations about our work or about things that we had been reading in the seminar, the contemporary art part. So it's the studio spaces, it's kind of like a nice community space. And then when we got sort of the second group of MFAs came in, they were on the floor below us. And so they kind of had their group, and then we had our group, and then we'd all kind of like get together at different points and talk about different stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And just to kind of go into some of the living spaces, so students do have the option. We have apartments that students can live in that are it's SACI housing. And they're typically 2 bedrooms that have 2 to 3 students in a room as a standard. And then you can pay a single supplement fee to have your own room. The apartments are equipped with, they're furnished. They're equipped with things like pots, pans, and dishes, sheets and blankets, things you need to cook with, washers, that kind of thing. I would say it's a mix between what graduate students decide to do. Some students will live in SACI housing for part or all of the time of their experience. Other students will get their own apartments. I would say, looking at kind of the cost of living and housing, SACI apartments, I feel like, versus like a 12-month lease versus if you're in the 2-year studio art program, the housing is only available for the 2 semesters. So if you're planning to stay the summers in Florence, that might influence your decision. Rada, I don't know where you lived, but do you want to talk about housing or like what you did?
Yeah, so I didn't live in the SACI housing. Like from the get-go, I got my own apartment. Actually, when I went to Florence, I still didn't have an apartment rented because I found it a little bit difficult to do online. So I booked a hotel for like 4 or 5 nights. And then I went to like a rental agency and found a place. And it definitely wasn't as nice as the SACI housing, but it was a little cheaper, and I'm kind of more of a loner, independent type, I guess. So I just kind of like to do things my own way. And then also I was planning on staying like over the summer, like staying the whole time in Florence. So I just I rented my own apartment, and I had that for like the first 8 months or so, and then I moved to another apartment, and then I was there for the rest of the time. And there's actually like a rental agency there, and they are very familiar with SACI and deal a lot with the SACI students, and they were the only ones who were open in the middle of August because it's like some festivities and all the Florentines had left town and just shut down their businesses. So they were the only ones I could find open, but they were very nice. They got me an apartment right away. So they were, they knew the whole deal. They were easy to deal with. It helped me out a lot.
Yeah, and I can say I've done both. So I was a SACI student as an undergrad, and I lived in SACI housing, and then I also lived in Florence at a different point and got my own independent housing. And yeah, SACI housing is really nice, but I think that it just depends on kind of your own own desire. Like if you want to be able to stay in your apartment throughout an entire year, or for, if you're wanting to move to Florence for the full 2 years and just have that apartment, or I think that that's an easier route to go to. Another thing sometimes I say is if you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to go and live in SACI housing to begin with, and then you can always, if you communicate with the housing director, even like some time before the second semester, you could move. Or maybe you at the end of the first academic year, that beginning of that summer, you move into an apartment and stay there. So I would say there's a lot of different ways to do it. Us at SACI, we're not kind of set on one way or another. It's, it's an option that we offer students. And as long as you communicate to us your plans, and we don't secure your housing and then you leave it, that can become an issue. But I think that that's, for us, it's more about, you being comfortable. And yeah, there's rental agencies. I moved a bunch of times, and I was in Florence for a full year. I had a little bit of a hard time finding a place to live. But I think I didn't go through an agency too. So I think I'd recommend doing that. You'll probably end up somewhere a little bit better right away. But I think, yeah, it's not too difficult to find housing outside of SACI if that's what you decide to do. To go into the next question, I see some questions. I might throw in some links just to answer these questions really quick. One of the questions is there a list of professors that we have? And the answer to that is yes. We have a full listing of faculty bio. So I'm going to toss those links in there into the chat section, because I think that that's kind of the best way to kind of look at our faculty. Another question I see is, are there facilities, studios, or opportunities around the students can intern or apprentice with? The answer to that is yes, but it really just depends. We have a lot of collaborations with different institutions in Florence. In the beginning of the session, I mentioned, last fall, our students were working with Ai Weiwei and some of the artists that he brought together for this project called Political Objects. And so our students were working closely with that project. And so that was a really interesting thing. We have some collaborations that are more focused on visual design with some major institutions like the Ferragamo Museum, also the academia, places like that. I think that those kinds of opportunities come up often. And then I know, just depending on what you're interested in, maybe this isn't specific to the MFA in studio art, but you do get a lot of that kind of individualized attention that Radha mentioned. And so if our faculty know someone or have a contact that might be relevant to something you're interested in, they're usually pretty able to connect you. So I think of an MFA in photography student was interested in photographic books, and so he was connected with an artist that we knew in Milan that that's their primary focus and work. So I think that there's a lot of that that opportunity. I don't know how much or little you would want to add to that, Radha, at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the faculty are definitely a great resource for that. I know, like when I was there, Christina was working, she was working with one of the professors, Dan, and her work dealt a lot with kind of a combination of photography and painting and like found photographs and that kind of thing. And so he helped her sort of work with the museum there. I think it's like the Museum of Natural History. I don't remember exactly which one. And she was working, they had this humongous old photo archive of like these photographs of, you know, tribes people from like back in the early 1900s and all of these things that, so she was working with them and like scanning photographs and just kind of dealing with this archive, and it became a big part of her work. And Dayon was able to facilitate that. So I think that, yeah, the faculty members are a big asset for doing those kinds of like internships and that kind of thing.
Yeah. To kind of go from there, one of the questions we have is, it was about, the online application asks students to choose classes for the fall, and do we have advice on that? I think the advice I would give is that there is an interview process during the application. And if you're really unsure, I mean, you can fill out the classes that you think you might be interested in, you know, when you apply, of course, but those aren't something that you're set in stone to do. So I would usually say that you would want to select the courses that Rada, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm having freezing. I don't know. In any case, sorry to keep fuzzing in, but if you're really unsure, they're good people to have that conversation with. I guess my main advice would be to do that, to have that conversation with them if you're really unsure. I don't know how you approached it, Rada. I think for me that people shouldn't get too caught up on that selecting the courses in the application phase. Something to note is that our undergraduate study abroad program students fill out the same online application as the grad students. So it's a little bit more relevant for them, although the registrar will use that to place you in any classes that are like studio electives and that kind of thing. So you don't want to ignore it completely, but you don't have to feel committed to it either. So I don't know, Rada, if you have any advice about that.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty flexible about that. And I think like on the website, you can find like the CVs of the instructors. You can find the syllabus for the class. It's pretty in-depth, sort of the information that's out there about the class. You can get a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like and sort of what the professor is like. So that's helpful to kind of go through that to get an idea of what sounds interesting to you. But definitely it's pretty flexible. If you put something down and you get there and you change your mind, they're very accommodating.
Yeah, and as mentioned, if you need to connect with the faculty in advance, if you're really unsure, we can connect you with them, because I know that they'll want to give you advice too. You know, so if you're accepted to the program and you put something, you can contact them and talk to them about it too. And because we want you to be in the right things for the fall. One of the other questions that we have here is, I'll answer this one really quick and then I'll go back to the longer one. One of the questions is, will this video stay archived to go back and look? Yep, you can follow the same link that you had to join. And so you can go back and look at this. But I'll go to I'm going to skip ahead to one more question we just got. I know there's a question about alumni, and we can definitely get into that. But I want to answer this because it still has to do with choosing courses. So signing up for courses like beginning versus advanced. I would say for grad students, you're going to be picking, unless it's something that you didn't ever take at all, like say you want to take Batik, you want to have that be a part of something you're studying for your work, and you've never done Batik, you would pick a beginning level Batik class. But other things that you do have experience with, you would want to select something that you would want to select a course that kind of meets your experience in that sense. So, if you're looking at wanting to be working on etching, you would want to pick any kind of advanced level. But for a lot of the grad students, the levels are less important because you may be working more in like may be working within a class, but in more of like a directed independent study capacity. And Radha, I know you mentioned that you took photography as a class. I don't know if that was your first time taking a black and white photo class, or kind of what you would think about kind of levels of things. So.
Yeah, well, for me, it was the first time taking any kind of photography, so it was like super new, but it was very sort of flexible. Like even within the class, you had sort of different projects for different students, depending on what level you were at, what you were looking to do. And I liked the class because it wasn't like assignments of like, now learn how to use, aperture, now learn how to use, different aspects of your camera. It was more like, it was sort of more fluid and more project-based and more kind of getting to the heart of what you want to do with your photography and learning to use the camera along the way as a tool for that.
Yeah, great. I hope that answered that question, but yeah, I really do think ultimately, because the program has such kind of like, it does have a component that you're kind of on your own like track almost, and that using the faculty as a resource for answering those questions is really kind of essential. One of the other questions, so I'll go to the next question, is what have alumni done post-graduation? Have they moved back to the US or stayed and continued to work in Italy and beyond? I can talk a little bit about that, and I'll let Radha talk about that too, because I feel like I know some things, maybe she can share some things. We have a great network of alumni. The program is fairly young. So the MFA in Studio Art program, I think, is 6 years old. So we have, I think, 3 graduating classes at this point. And I think they've done some exceptional stuff. A lot of great exhibitions and artist residencies. I know one of our recent alumni or alumnas, April Moon, she just was granted a 3-month artist residency in Milan. We've had others that have gotten residencies in other parts of Europe. Jessie Taylor, who is graduated 2 years ago, she has an exhibition. She just had an exhibition in LA and one in Korea. So there's definitely exhibitions of work. There's people teaching. So I would say one of the resources I'd send you guys to is the SACI art blog. And I can, our website has a lot of great information, and from the homepage you can get to the blog, but I'm going to toss the blog into the chat as well, because I think that that has a lot of great recent stories. And to me, I think one of the impressive things to me is that, like I said, the program is really young. So, I think our students are really kind of going great places. And they in Europe. I had a little bit of a challenge finding an alum for this chat, because everyone's in such different time zones. So I know, Radha, you're in Ohio. I don't know, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I had to go get my charger because my computer's gonna die.
That's fine. We're having some difficulties. I lost my voice already tonight. So, but I'd love for you to speak about kind of what you're doing now, and both you're an artist, and I know you're in Ohio, but I'll let you kind of talk about that, and then also if there's any of your fellow alum that you want to shout out to at the end of this, which we're gonna wrap up probably in the next couple of minutes. But Radha, while you're talking, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put up the last page of my presentation, which has my contact information and has Radha's website, because I think that's a good place to go and see her work. So while you're kind of talking about what you're doing, I'll go to that. So also any participants can copy down my information if they have questions, and then also check out your website too. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, I graduated in April of 2015, and then I stayed in Italy for another. I was staying with my parents for a while, but they were having to move. They didn't really have plans. And so while I was at SACI, I met my friend Emily J, and she is a SACI alum, and then she was working there as the photography TA when I was there, and we became good friends. And she lives here in Ohio. And so I talked to her, and she told me, well, like, just move out here with me, and we'll see how things go. So I was like, okay. So I moved to Ohio. I'd never been so far east in my life in the United States. And I've been living here just about 2 years now. And then Emily teaches at a university here at Ohio Northern. And she helped me get a class last fall teaching there. And then I'm teaching the same class again this fall, and I'll be teaching more classes, like actual studio classes in the spring. And for a while, it was a little, I don't know, it was hard to get a lot of my own work done. I was working a lot just to pay the bills. It was hard to find a lot of time for my own work. It was definitely a big change from spending, 2 years almost exclusively focused on your work. But this summer, I kind of worked a lot, saved up some money, and just took the summer off to work on my painting, because I have a show coming up in March. And I agreed to do a giant sort of mural size painting. So I spent the summer in Costa Rica working on that. Let's see, I had a show in January here in Ohio with some other alumni, some friends of mine from SACI, Nina and Molly, who both stayed in Italy, and then with Emily and I. And so we did a show sort of dealing with that experience of having lived in both of those cultures and being sort of tied to both of those cultures. So that was really a great experience. So it's been pretty good. I feel like it's a little bit difficult to kind of get things going at the beginning, but I think that's sort of to be expected with anything. But I feel like that SACI really helped me sort of discover myself and become more secure in myself as an artist, and I think that's really helped me kind of advance in my career as an artist and in teaching art, which is really what I've kind of always wanted to do since I was in undergrad. That's what I've thought about doing, and now that's what I'm doing. So I think SACI, it was a very important step towards doing that. But that's kind of what I've been up to for the last 2 years.
Kind of talking about, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, go back to this, but kind of talking about the teaching component and that being something you're interested in. I know there's opportunities within the curriculum to be a teaching assistant. Did you take advantage of that at all? Or
yeah. Yeah, I did. I was a teaching assistant for a sculpture class with John Taylor for the summer session. So that was pretty intensive because it was 8 or 10 hours a day, twice a week, which I quite enjoy. I like longer, intense periods of work. And then I did a teaching assistantship with Gary in his beginning and intermediate painting class. And I think they both were a really great experience. Because I had taken classes, I'd taken a sculpture class with John, but it was definitely a different experience being a TA. And, they both were very sort of supportive and made sure that I had a lot of opportunity to interact with the students and give critiques and that kind of stuff. And, even consulted me on grading and that kind of stuff. So it was an experience that really helped me feel a lot more relaxed when I was applying for teaching positions, knowing that I had sort of been there, done that to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's great.
It was very
helpful. know there's others too that are also teaching, but I think probably the thing for me that I've just kind of noticed too is just like the like drive and connection to like make your work. I know when I was talking to Gwyneth, who participated in one of our alumni panels last fall, that she was just like continuing to make her work and still connected to the people that she met at SACI, and so I thought that was a really nice part of that too. And I'm happy to hear that you have an exhibition coming up. Where is it?
It's going to be in a gallery here in Findlay nearby. It's called the Neon Heater Gallery. Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying to get everything done.
Please do share the information with us so we can put it on the SACI art blog. So yeah. So I'm just gonna, we've gone a little bit over, and so I do want to kind of, I think, end the session, let Radha go back to her stuff, but I do want to thank you for joining us, Radha. I appreciate it, and I hope that everyone that joined and watched got a lot out of it. Sorry about my breaking from the presentation, my losing my voice, but hopefully still I think we answered a lot of questions, which is great, and so yeah, I just want to thank everyone that participated. I encourage you to look at the links that I shared in the chat. Check out the SACI art blog. It includes information about some of the field trips that I mentioned, as well as some of the alumni shows, I think, including the show that Radha had with our SACI alum, Emily J., who's an alum of the post-baccalaureate program. And so I just encourage you to check that stuff out. And feel free to contact me via email. If you didn't record it the first time, you can watch the video and go and send me an email and check out Radha's website too. So yeah, so thanks again, and I'm gonna end the broadcast here. So thanks, and Radha, you can stay on, and we can chat too. Thanks for joining.